Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Plus 20 forum. Can we take a seat? Gosh, can anybody up here see anything down there? Actually, it's better the shorter you are. Hi, come in, please take a seat. Welcome to this first of the Plus 20 forums, designed in part to celebrate FSC's 20th anniversary, but in part to tackle some of the beefy questions that bring us all together, which aren't just certification, but are to do with forestry. Yesterday, Sally Uren's meeting suggested 8 major external trends, one of which, I seem to remember, was increasing demand, decreasing supply. And she suggested that we're not only experiencing peak oil, but pretty much peak everything as the population grows and demographics shift. And trade flows shift around the world as well. And as one of the members here said to me the other day, can we supply 9 billion people with the essential resources that they need? Not only that, but the products and services that they demand. And I don't have to tell you, many reports now confirm that demand for the next 20 years for timber and wood fibre will far exceed any of the plans for plantations. So all of these questions ask questions of the best certification systems, of which you are part. And you're already under pressure to produce credible resources. But you're not just a certification system, and a lot of people have always spoken about the platform that FSC provides to discuss stuff that's wider than certification. And this roundtable is designed to do just that. Let me introduce you to the people you have in front of you. Barbara Bramble is the chair of, amongst other things, is the chair of the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials. I'm always getting that wrong. Diogo da Silveira is the chief executive of Portucel Sopracel, a leading Portuguese company in pulp and paper, responsible for 3% of Portugal's exports and 1% of their GDP. That's... I love it. Peter Agnefial is the president and chief executive of Ikea. I think you know what they do. I certainly do. My house is full of their stuff. It's just appalling. Pilar Camacao is the president of the Association of Forest Engineers for Native Forests, a Chilean NGO concerned with sustainable development, forests, and the equitable distribution of benefits. Dennis Johnson is the president and chief executive of Tetra Pak. I think you know what they do too. Jim Lopez, president and chief executive officer of Tembec, long-term supporter of FSC with 10 million hectares of FSC certified forest out there. Marco Mensink, the recently appointed, congratulations Marco, Director General of CEPI, Confederation of European Paper Industries, and Brad Young, who's the Executive Director of the National Aboriginal Forestry Association, NGO that promotes and supports Aboriginal involvement in forest management to build sustainable communities. This is your panel. We'll talk in a bit. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause for coming here. I think I'd like to dive straight into this, really. And first of all, I think we just need to take the subject by the neck, really. Peter, Ikea must be front and center in this. How do you see this accelerating demand, accelerating competition from different business models, a relatively decreasing supply? How do you see that working out from your viewpoint?
It's a good question, but before replying it, maybe putting it a little bit in perspective and sharing a bit more what Ikea is about. Ikea was founded some 70 years ago. We run according to a vision of creating a better everyday life for the many people. And I guess that some of you know and have visited one of our stores and know our product, but not everybody knows how we work throughout the value chain, if you say like that. We have set out to trying to become twice as good and to grow in a sustainable way towards 2020. And if we become twice as good, we also believe as an effect of that we can become twice as big, having basically a turnover which is twice the size that we have today. But we wanted to grow in a sustainable way, so we have set out an agenda that we say that IKEA should become people and planet positive, meaning it's not about doing things less bad, it's about having a positive impact on people and the planet. And obviously, wood is a very, very important source of material for us. About some 60% of the products that we retail contains wood one way or the other. The obvious one being a bookcase, but also, for instance, this chair, which is a Tulsta Ektorp chair from IKEA, which is very comfortable, by the way. You know, the frame, etc., comes from wood material. So we are very committed to making our own operations sustainable, very committed to contributing to the people actually are able to live a more sustainable life at home by stimulating them to take small steps in the right direction. And as we are a big user of wood, our yearly need for wood is about 15 million cubic meters. And obviously, it's important for us to source wood in a sustainable way. So we've set up a target that by 2017, to start with, 50% of it should be from what we call more sustainable sources, which today equals FSC certified wood or recycled wood, which is also very important. But as we will continue to grow beyond 17, we will also continue to raise our ambitions to go for basically 100% FSC certified wood by 2020. So with a growing business and obviously a growing demand, I think what we can contribute with and what we are contributing with is basically two things. One is that I think through valued partners like WWF, we contribute with certifying more wood and more forests. Together, the past years, we've been contributing to certification of about 35 million hectares of FSC certified wood, which in essence means that we increase the supply of certified sustainable produced raw material. And 35 million hectares is the size of Italy, if we should put it a reference. And we're committed to do another 15 million hectares by 2020, so that in all will be about the size of Germany. So obviously doing our best of increasing supply. Then at IKEA, we see really sustainable and sustainability as a driver of innovation, of renewal, and of thinking in a creative way that we haven't done in the past. A number of years ago, a table like this one, which is also by IKEA, called LAC, would be a solid wood construction. But we are really committed to getting more out of the whole tree than we've done in the past. With solid wood, you can only use certain parts of the tree for furniture production. But we've started with constructions like chipboard constructions, which enables us to basically to use 100% of the wood, making more of less. And then next step in our evolution has been these kind of hollow constructions, which basically means that we have a top construction of a thin board material, and then inside it's a hollow construction. And thereby we're using significantly less woods and trees than we would have done otherwise. So I think that is, in a way, two very important examples of what we can do. Increase supply, contribute to that through great partners, and then see the sustainability challenge as a great force to drive innovation and to drive new business. And I think those are the two predominant things that we do at IKEA. That was a long answer to your question. I'm sorry for that, but anyhow.
I'm amazed. I'm amazed that I just wonder how many of the names of the IKEA items you could recite for you, because you're in this room, yes, possibly, famous for it. Diogo, from your viewpoint, how do you see it?
So Portugal Porcel is not as known as IKEA, not yet. We'll do our best to get there, but we basically produce pulp and paper, and we specialize in what is called uncoated wood-free paper. That's basically office paper, and we are the market leader in Europe. So maybe I would share two points to illustrate the way we view it with facts. So we have, as we are an integrated player, we of course have our own forest. We have 120,000 hectares, 100% FSC. So we can't get more. But we use a lot of trees and wood that is not our own, so we do buy it in Portugal. And to put the money to put the money where the mouth is, we do pay a premium for FSC wood, €4 per cubic meter. So in Portugal, the landowners are very small, so it's very difficult for them to address all the costs associated actually with FSC. So to try to help them and to incentivize them to go for it, that's why a couple of years ago we believe we were the first ones actually to introduce such an operation, such a price premium. Maybe the second illustration I would say is that, as of course the pressure on the demand, and which is already today very, very big, but will only but increase given population development. We currently have a big project in Mozambique, in sub-Saharan Africa, and I think the key things when you address plantations is to plan well in advance, to prepare. And we have been there for 4 years. 4 years just listening, understanding, observing, meeting people, understanding. So we haven't done we have not planted yet, not even 2,000 hectares in a plan that will go for over 100,000 in 4 years, because we are first listening and doing all, this environmental, social, and of course, economic impact studies. So it's going right now, and I can tell you that besides, normal meetings that everyone will do in the main cities, we held more than 25 meetings in the local districts, both in the Zambezia province and in Manica province, meeting over 400 people of the local communities to get their feedback, to get their input. And so we just try to do it the best way we can. So that's the way I can start answering your question.
And can you hold that line when, if the most violent predictions of demand versus supply come to pass? Will you be able to pay more? Will you be able to be that careful in your plantations policy?
In general, in the world, I think there's still lots of area that, if one addresses in the right way, will actually protect natural forests. So yes, I believe that if you do it right from the start, that's the point. It's much more difficult once you haven't started off well to then correct. So if you do it well right from the start, yes, I think there is still room.
Marco, is this good news or bad for the trade?
I think I won't mention company examples, as we represent about 900 mills, and at least 2 of these gentlemen on this panel are actually part of our membership. I hope you're aware of that one. But maybe broaden the issue a bit more, because we're talking about increasing demand worldwide and population growth based, but it's already there. At the moment in Europe, and I talk from a European perspective, we burn more wood for energy than we use for paper or wood products. And that's increasing. CEPI made a study in 2007 where I think on the bottom line it said, we think we have a problem, but I don't think anyone will be so stupid to bring wood chips from the US to Europe by boat or to Sweden. And that's the case today. Wood chips, wood pellets from the US will probably triple by 2020, subsidy driven just to meet the demand there. Instead of mentioning very good examples, which you've heard so far, I'd like to throw the ball back a bit into the room, which is the question if we should focus on these companies who are really pushing forward where at the same time, at least as large a user is not being met with any requirements at all. Meaning if I drive home to work in the morning and I'm Belgian-based, there is Electrabel, our energy company, saying we just burn so much more wood and therefore we are sustainable by my electricity. It's a question I would like to raise for FSC, which is if you start from the forest or from the tree, the use shouldn't matter. And maybe it's a question for the people behind FSC. Which questions are you asking to the ones who use wood for energy, for biofuels, for biomaterials, or for any other application? I think that will help our case. It will make it difficult in the beginning when demand would increase even more. But the way forward to increase supply is not to forget currently half of the other users, but probably the bigger group of users in the future. And that's maybe a last question to the crowd. Would you want to focus to make these companies even better, which is probably a good cause, gaining, let's say, from 80 to 90%, or would you focus on the ones who now start at zero and repeat the success with FSC that you've had on our sectors? We've learned, we've grown. I think we're getting more mature, but repeat that success also in the energy business, the biofuel business, the biochemicals business, which is an issue that came to mind when I read this question.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, team, there will be a chance to ask questions at the end. Barbara, Marco brought you right into this.
Yeah, Marco, you just made my cue. So I am here representing the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials, but some of you know me, and I'm from National Wildlife Federation, which is a large, rather conservative NGO in the United States. But we were a founder of FSC. We are absolutely behind the goals and very proud of the successes of FSC since its very beginning. And about maybe 10 years ago, we started to have a very interesting debate inside National Wildlife Federation, which I would tell you a little bit about. We had a forest team that was all very excited about forest conservation and a number of very important battles going on inside FSC, and we were leading a charge to help find more markets for FSC certified products. And we also had a climate team, which was lobbying somewhat on a different path. They were saying biofuels, very good thing for the environment. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Substitute bio stuff for fossil fuels. And suddenly we began to look at each other and say, wait a minute, do we actually know if using bio things is actually better for the environment or not? And it turned out we didn't know. And we started to do some research. And we learned a whole lot of things that are still actually, some of them need some more work. But the basic thing I learned was that all bio things, pretty much, can be substituted for all other ones in various industrial applications. Not obviously beautiful wood, not the kinds of things that need to have their grain showing and really have premium wood, but basically everything else that's chipped and pelletized, and fibers are competing with cotton fibers and corn fibers and sugar fibers and bamboo fibers and every other kind of fiber. And so in the end, if we don't have a way to tell whether something is produced in a sustainable way for all of these industrial uses, we are simply going to have FSC concentrating on the beautiful wood and maybe lose our forests anyway. And as we began to look at this growing population issue, I would suggest that the goal for 9 billion population in the world to stabilize isn't going to be possible. It'll probably be 10 billion, and it might be higher than that. And there's at least half of those people who have aspirations and a right to better life and to use more materials, not less. So we're looking at a world of growing demand. Much of it is, of course, absolutely required for a decent life for billions of people. food, feed, fiber. Now we're talking about fuels. And then we're going to be talking about biomaterials used for everything else. In the plastics, cosmetics, lubricants, food supplements, etc. And so we helped start something called the Roundtable on Biomaterials now. It was biofuels when it was born. At the moment, I chair that. And we are trying to be a good partner to FSC in marching forward in the world with credible standards that begin to ask that many more of these uses be certified to high and credible standards. Now, that's a long-term goal, and I think the FSC's strategic planning process could be a wonderful place to have a dialogue about what sort of partnerships might be possible among the credibility standards, the really credible standards, the ones that ICEAL recognizes, like RSB and FSC, and fair trade and a bunch of other ones. And we should be looking at how to make the requirements on bioenergy in Europe, which are 0 at this point. I mean, that is ridiculous from a civil society standpoint. I feel quite embarrassed that a lot of states in the US are in the same condition. They define renewable energy as wind, solar, and biopower. Well, with conditions, with certification, no. In many cases with nothing. And so getting from that situation to a certification situation is a very hard job, but I hope to enlist some of my fellow NGOs here in a much wider battle so that FSC is not alone in this. And I think FSC and RSB could be helpful together, but we should talk about that.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to move on to talk about the role of certification in this, because we talk a lot about certification here, unsurprisingly. But the question is, it's not the only tool, it's not the only instrument in the orchestra. And I wonder if we could talk a little bit later on about how important an instrument it is and what part it can play. But Brad, some of the world's largest intact forests are in Canada. What does this issue look like from your viewpoint of the people who live in those forests and who started off there?
Well, first I would like to introduce myself, Brad Young. I am the Executive Director of the National Aboriginal Forestry Association, current present-day Canada in my language, Mikaneka Ski. And I would like to thank my Indigenous colleagues for trusting me to represent our interests here with our esteemed colleagues from the business and the social sustainability world. Really the leaders, I would say, in organic, sustainable entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, including business in the world. So in terms of an underwriting feature of all this from an Indigenous perspective, and I'll speak first from a Canadian perspective, is Canada has around 54 million hectares of FSC certified lands. And of that amount, First Nations are on a tremendous growth path in terms of uptaking forest tenure in Canada. In 1980, we had only formal title in terms of forest management tenure to about 49,000 hectares. 49,000 hectares, so really a logging concession held by one First Nation in Western Canada, Tanazul Lumber. And now what we found is in 2007, First Nations, through a combination of political activism, economic activism, a drive to take control of their destiny on their forested homelands, held about 5.5 million hectares of forest tenure. In 2014, with the Great Recession hollowing out much of the forest sector and producing devastating results across the globe in terms of our economies, First Nations being stable, being loyal to their traditional territories, stepped in and repatriated an additional amount, an additional quantum of forest tenure. The exact numbers are under tabulation right now, but our numbers are saying we hold currently in Canada around 10 to 15 million hectares of forest tenure that is represented in about 27 million cubic meters of annual allowable cut. And just for an example, that amount of tenure, if you were to rank First Nations in Canada against other nation states, we would be in the top 3 or 4 in terms of fiber producing jurisdictions on a national level in the world. So the proposition that I have back to my colleagues in business, but also in the other chambers and in the other sectors of society that are here in the room today, because it really is a global leadership crowd, is I think there's an underwriting and a hidden value equation in FSC. The first chair of the Forest Stewardship Council was entrusted to an Indigenous man, an Anishinaabe lawyer from Canada named Dave Nalagabo. A lot of people don't know this. They don't know that Toronto was the site of the first GA, and the Aboriginal Chamber in Canada, now the Aboriginal Chamber. There was no Aboriginal Chamber then, but the Indigenous organizations and leadership put forward their well wishes, their prayers, their hopes that the broader society of the world would wake up and say, we cannot continue down this path of what we would call in our language, wheat-to-goo consumption, to eat ourselves to death. And I think the Great Recession sent a powerful message to the world that that level of uber consumption is not sustainable. In the middle, what we have had is we've had survivors in terms of the hard world of business, stay true to sustainable concepts in terms of finance, but also in terms of the environment. We have some of the world leaders here on the stage today. And I would say that the hidden equation in terms of the forest sector now is this large and growing trajectory of First Nations taking control and owning the actual traditional territory that they are on, the forested resources, and holding it in a modern day conception in terms of tenure and supply. I think it would be this group in terms of, if we can think about Dr. Sally's presentation, the end of your QR code in terms of your new marketing in the new age. Wouldn't it be fantastic if your supply chain base was filled with Indigenous communities that were participating in the sustainable management of their traditional territories? From the tax base and the jobs, they were building homes, economies in the regions, for the hollowed out regions and all of the areas where the forest sector was devastated across the world, that hospitals were being maintained, clinics, schools were being maintained by that economic cycle. I think that is the value proposition that Indigenous people are bringing back to the world's economy and to the FSC system. We are hidden. It's not all about concerns and about activism from an Indigenous perspective. In fact, I think there is a big constructive push that we want to propose to all the chambers, but also the business leaders, that Indigenous people are showing ourselves. Hopefully, we're conducting ourselves with diplomacy and with tact and the well wishes and goodwill of the Assembly, and make touch with us, contact us. We have a CEO of a major Maori plantation forestry operation in New Zealand, sustainably managed. They have supply. There's markets that could be made with them. The question that I have, and the proposition is that zone of value extraction, if there's going to be business, Indigenous communities want to share in that value creation, because we will share our marketing, we'll share our vision, we'll share our energy, and that's what I would bring forward to the group to consider today. And also with our friends in the sustainability world, we'll be there right there, hand in hand with you. We want Mother Earth to survive and to heal, and we think forests regenerating all over the world is a part of it.
Thank you. Pilar, that must have been good to hear from your viewpoint as well. How do you see this breaking out for the people of the forest that you're working with? Because you're working with professionals, in the forest to see how they could be managed sustainably, but also, as I understand it, to talk a lot about the equitable distribution of the profits that are made from this activity.
Bueno, exactamente. Yo pertenezco a la agrupación de ingenieros forestales por el bosque nativo, soy la actual presidenta. Y nuestra organización, que es de la sociedad civil, impulsamos el manejo y la conservación de los bosques nativos y la distribución equitativa de los recursos que provienen de los bosques y del sector forestal. Bueno, para nosotros, y es lo que quiero plantear hoy día en este foro, es que existe una preocupación lo que está pasando en Chile con el tema de las plantaciones y de la credibilidad, que era lo que se hablaba, de la credibilidad de la certificación. Creemos que bueno, un aumento de la demanda, ¿cierto?, no debe justificar un proceso de certificación de plantaciones bajo en exigencias. Bueno, y eso está relacionado con una serie de aspectos que nosotros hemos documentado justamente por este trabajo que realizamos, y que tiene que ver que, claro, las plantaciones forestales hoy día son una posibilidad para aumentar la oferta de productos forestales. Sin embargo, cuando son mal planificadas, traen consigo impactos negativos. Y eso, por eso me alegra que acá se haya comentado el tema de la planificación. Justamente pensar en que si se van a hacer plantaciones, se hagan en el largo plazo y justamente considerando los impactos negativos que estas traen, las plantaciones de gran escala. Debemos tener en cuenta que, bueno, la demanda proviene principalmente del norte y es en el sur donde, claro, que es el del sur que abastece dicha demanda. Por lo tanto, todos los problemas ambientales y sociales que se generan en las plantaciones han permanecido principalmente en el sur. En este punto es clave entonces que la certificación, si se quiere convertir en una herramienta poderosa para mejorar la gestión forestal, debe cambiar seria y profundamente la forma en que se certifican las plantaciones hoy en día y considerar una nueva forma de planificar las plantaciones, que era lo que se estaba conversando acá, tomando en cuenta, ¿cierto?, los principios y criterios de todos estos impactos negativos. También para nosotros es una preocupación cómo hay algunas plantaciones que han sido certificadas en terrenos de reclamación histórica de pueblos originarios. Eso es otro aspecto que queremos resaltar hoy día. Y claro, porque esto atenta con lo que hablaba en un principio, que tiene que ver con la credibilidad del sello, justamente en estos grupos y en estos pueblos. Porque estos son conflictos que se traen desde años y que los gobiernos no han sido capaces de solucionar. Por lo tanto, claro, creemos que no se debe certificar FSC los territorios que están siendo reclamados y que se encuentran en conflicto. Eso es lo que hoy día queremos plantear. Y sino más bien debe formar un grupo de trabajo ligado a la Comisión de Pueblos Indígenas para identificar los territorios en moratoria, o sea, que queden como suspendidos, y delimitarlos hasta que los gobiernos, ¿cierto?, resuelvan adecuadamente esos problemas. Y los predios que ya han sido certificados y que tienen este conflicto tienen que acordar un programa de solución de dichos conflictos con los pueblos. Bueno, y además que las oficinas nacionales de FSC puedan tener la capacidad para participar en estos procesos de solución de conflictos, a mayor autonomía. Como tercer punto, claro, también está el tema de cómo toda esta demanda, ¿cierto?, trae el aumento de plantaciones. Y el aumento de plantaciones, por supuesto que genera riqueza, ha generado gran riqueza, pero principalmente la riqueza es para las empresas, que tiene que ver con la distribución de los recursos. ¿Qué es lo que pasa con las externalidades negativas que son absorbidas por las comunidades aledañas? Y claro, y eso se transforma en un problema. Incluso, bueno, en Chile tenemos los índices de pobreza más altos en las zonas donde existen empresas certificadas. Entonces no se justifica que junto a esa riqueza la pobreza se mantenga. Y bueno, la preocupación hoy día es que a pesar de haber sido analizado este problema en el año 2007, acá en FSC, en el Grupo de Política de Plantaciones, hoy, después de 7 años, no se aprecian los cambios favorables que quisiéramos, a pesar de la superficie de plantaciones certificada aumentado. ¿Ya? Y bueno, como cuarto punto, es importante y es fundamental para nosotros mitigar y eliminar o compensar los impactos negativos de las plantaciones, que era lo que estábamos conversando a gran escala, tanto los ambientales como los sociales. Y es más importante aún velar para que no se vuelvan a repetir, y eso tiene que ver con la planificación de las plantaciones, de modo diferente a como se están haciendo ahora. Para evitar la repetición de los problemas, que era lo que comentabas tú. Entonces se necesita una certificación más rigurosa, transparente, participativa, inclusiva, que también permita ver el territorio, como mencionabas, con los terrenos indígenas o con las comunidades aledañas. En Chile tenemos una serie de impactos, pero quisiera después que podamos compartirlo, impactos negativos respecto a las plantaciones, y por lo tanto para nosotros es una preocupación hoy día cómo se está llevando esta certificación. Entonces eso voy a dejarlo para que lo comentemos después.
Thank you. Thank you. Dennis, I was reading the Tetra Pak environment report, a large document. You've got lots of things happening out there. I want to throw you a slightly curveball. How does Tetra Pak see this problem? How is it coping with it? I know that you've got lots and lots of projects out there. And is there anything that you see that will move towards the issues expressed by Indigenous peoples and First Nation peoples as well?
I think it's important to maybe say that Tetra Pak was founded in 1950, and it was founded on the founder's vision that a package should save more than it costs. That was his vision, and he was looking very much at the possibilities of obviously reducing waste. If you look at today, 1/3 of food produced goes wasted. This while 900 million people go actually hungry. Tetra Pak has since then evolved, and today we deliver close to 180 billion packages. We very much like Ikea want to grow sustainably. We have the ambition and the goal of have 100% FSC certified board. And this is something that we've been working very much for. And 70% of our packaging material comes from board, so that's why it's so important. Now, at the same time, I think it's also important for all of us to understand that renewable resources need to be cared for. And I think, if we all actually manage renewable resources responsibly, they will always be there. And I think, Sweden is a good example of that. If you actually look back in history, Sweden was almost driving forests to extinction back in the mid-1800s. And I think, is basically then on, is responsible forest management was actually introduced. And today, the situation is completely different. So, this actually brings the importance of actually managing forestry well to the top of the agenda. And I think, it's important what some of my colleagues here said today as part of the panel, because we believe strongly that, the role for us is to continue towards our goal. And that is, 100% certified board. FSC certified board in this case, because we believe in FSC. We've been supporting FSC all along. But at the same time, I think, when competition for board comes up, I think it's important then to look as well beyond. And I think that is when, some of the questions that have been raised become very important. I think that what we obviously look for is to have other people playing by the same rules. And I think that is going to be something very important. And that should be important not only for the industry, it should be important obviously for, in this case, every single plot of land where forestry is actually cared for. So I fully agree, with, in this case, the concern by the indigenous population. And I think, you know, is actually very positive to hear, you know, your views on this as well. That is a bit of, you know.
Thank you for that. This has to be good news for you, Jim, Tembec, you know, quality producers, FSC certified, scarce product. Is life wonderful for you?
Life's very interesting for us, as it is, I think, for most of the people in this room. And I think we're all here because we're all on a journey. It's not a sprint, but I can't say it's a marathon either. I would say it's a journey of a sustained push to try to get to a better place in terms of how we manage our forest. We're close to the trees. We manage some 10 million hectares of forest that we harvest under FSC. But what I look at, you know, just going back to where we were just a decade and a half ago and how we've evolved is kind of the evolution, I think, of our industry, and particularly in regards to those of us that believe that FSC certification is the right way to manage forest, and it's the right way to manage relationships. And if you could bear with me for a minute, I'd like to talk to you for a few moments about our journey, because I think it very much typifies what's happening with our certification journey. You know, we started a decade and a half ago as a pretty typical forest products company, and we believed if you cut a tree, you plant a tree, you grow a tree, and that's sustainable forest management. We were all there. And there was a time when the regime in one of the provinces in Ontario, believe it or not, a conservative government decided they wanted to raise the level of protection in the forest of Ontario substantially over where we were. And of course, the industry was all about the impossibility of doing that, and the conservation community was all about the possibilities are endless. So it ended up being a pretty traditional war in the woods with campaigns in front of government buildings, lots of publicity, lots of interviews on TV, and everybody putting their story out there. And it actually got to the point where we fought to a stalemate. Nobody won, the government didn't know what to do, so they were going to throw the whole process out the window. It just wasn't politically expedient for them to move on. There was jobs and industry on one side, and conservation and conservatism on the other side. And what happened was that we had a conversation with people we thought we'd never have a conversation with. And those were the environmentalists that were on the other side of the room shouting at us as we were shouting back at them. And our company sat there with some of the leaders of the World Wildlife Fund and other leading conservation groups, and we started to put our values on the table. What do we value as a company, and what do they value as a company? And contrary to our belief, our values were not that different. There was tremendous overlap. We all want biodiversity. We want forests for our children, our grandchildren. We want forests for recreation. And we all recognize that without a good economy and jobs, it was impossible to have good environmental protection. So from that moment on, we actually put a coalition together and pushed the government to finish that process. And frankly, we were the pariah of our industry at the time. We made a lot of enemies at the time. But once we got into that process, we found out something remarkable. Not only did we have values that were the same, but our perception about the conservation values that the environmental organizations wanted to preserve were not as radical as what we thought. They wanted X% of the forest preserved. We thought that meant X% of the trees. And what we found out was, gee, there's lakes and rivers and rocks and sand pits in there. It's all part of the ecosystem. So there was a large portion of the forest that the environmentalists wanted to protect that didn't even have economic values to us and our employees and our communities. The other thing that we found out was they weren't so interested in protecting forests right around our mills and our communities, which frankly were the most economical forest for the company. They wanted the intact forest, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, but they wanted the intact forest without the roads and bridges, which were usually the ones furthest away from our company. So we ended up getting that done. We saved 12% of the forest in Canada, in Ontario, for parks and protected areas. And that started us on the journey about the art of the possibility. From there, we reached a conservation agreement with the World Wildlife Fund to certify all of our forest under FSC, which was another impossibility by many people. Are you kidding me? You're going to have to consult with Aboriginal people. You're going to have to get in bed with the environmentalists, and you're going to have to agree to co-develop standards. Are you crazy? And what we found out again was having the conversations really led to a meeting of minds and an overlapping of values. So we're part of that journey next for us in Canada is what are we going to do about the Canadian Boreal Agreement, the last intact forest in Canada. And the same types of conversation are happening again. And what we found was the relationships we built in working with our Aboriginal communities, the relations that we built in working with the conservation community is highlighting the art of the possible. So, you know, for everybody that's involved in this process, I'd like to thank you and congratulate you because there were times when we certainly got discouraged about whether or not it was going to happen. But the conversations and the relationships and the common belief that a balance can be achieved between social, Aboriginal, environmental, and economic, that balance can happen, is going to lead us to the right possibilities in terms of getting the intact forest work done in the Canadian Boreal. So it's been a great journey, but I think we all recognize it's far from over, and it'll probably never be over in the tenure of the people that are sitting up on this stage.
Thanks for that. I'd like to take this on a little bit, and I noticed you've been writing a lot of notes, Peter, so I'm going to ask you what you've been writing down there. But I'd also like to move the conversation into, I'd like to ask all of you about certification, because we've been talking a certain amount this week as well, yesterday when the Strategic Planning Day, about the future of certification. Our chairman, Michael Conroy, said a couple of really fascinating things about the possibility that certification will become so complex as more and more factors are wound into it, that it becomes too difficult to do somehow or other. And also that firms, concerns such as the ones that you represent, are looking for simplicity. And maybe organizations will walk away from certification and say, our brand will be the testament to the standards that we stick to. Do you think that's a possibility? Where is certification's role in this? Anybody?
I think certification is actually, if I may start here, I mean, I think certification is something that has been extremely good for us. You know, it provides basic guarantee that, you know, the resources are well managed, which obviously gives us peace of mind. And I think that has been, you know, the collaboration that we've had with FSC. Now, at a certain point, you know, we had a very good discussion as well because some of the landowners, smaller landowners, actually had issues about the complexity of the system. But I think, you know, FSC has been extremely good in actually listening to that and then trying to adjust to a level where actually this is something that shouldn't be overly complicated for those smaller landowners either. So I think, you know, it's a little bit, you know, going back to the discussion that you had, sometimes it's engaging in the discussion and then, you know, are coming to a level where, you know, is something that seemed impossible to reach actually might be easier once you understand some of the issues, some of the challenges that, you know, each body go through. So that is, you know, just to start a little bit, you know, it's a discussion from that level.
I think in a way certification is very important, but maybe not a silver bullet. I think the most important thing for us is to actively engage with the people out in the forest, securing that we actually have forests that are treated in the way that it should be. And then you could say from our side, we have not been so actively maybe in our communication around certification so far, partly also due to that we are at 41% of our products today meets up with FSC criteria. But in the areas where we've come a little bit further, then we've become more active as well. For instance, the Ikea catalog. Oops. Sorry. Making a little bit commercial of that, which is now made out of 100% FSC certified paper. And then, of course, we feel it's important to share it with the consumers. And the consumers are interested in these kind of questions. So, yes, certification is important, but it's not the only solution, I would say. There are many things you have to take into account.
And I know you're being very modest about it, but there's how many languages is the little piece about FSC in?
I think it's translated to 21 languages or so. It's actually the world's largest print run. So we edit it in 218 million copies. So it's a big step forward, I think, considering that it was just 2 years ago where we really set the goal that we should go forward with it. But we have loads of things to do still, obviously.
Diogo.
Maybe what I believe we at Portucel or Portucel like the most about certification and FSC is that it's a clear incentive. It influences behaviors, attitudes. So it's not compulsory. You do it if you would like to. So the journey, the decision process of let's go for certification and then helping others going for certification, I think is very relevant because it's a bit like self-regulation. You know, the best regulation, whatever the sector we will be talking about, is self-regulation, because it means that you are trying to interiorize something, you are trying to have that go into your own culture. So on our side, that's what really we like about it. That's why, as we have said, we have 100% of our wood certified and try to influence others to do the same, because it goes to the culture.
Jim, and then I'll come to you. Jim.
On the question of complexity, a certain degree of complexity is a necessary part of the system if you're to have a credible system. In my view, the complexity should be the greatest in the forest, because managing a forest sustainably is a challenging science. And it's not just the science of growing trees or biodiversity, but it's the social sciences as well. You know, I've talked to CEOs of other companies that have decided to use other forestry regimes in Canada, and they talk about the difficulties in consulting with Aboriginal people and what happens if they don't like what you're doing. Exactly. But my view is the closer we get to the customers, the more simple we have to make the regime. It's got to be easy to understand and easy to communicate. I think the onus is on the forest managers to do the complexity and then make it simple for the people downstream.
Barbara.
That's actually a very good point and a very clear way to explain it. First with FSC and then with the Roundtable on Sustainable Biomaterials, I've heard the discussion of complexity a lot and from all different sides, and I hate to ever disagree with Michael, but my own view is that complexity is what you say when you maybe don't have enough demand for your product. If the buyer wants a credible assurance that the really important issues that are embodied in the standards have been taken care of, they don't want to have to worry about that. They don't want to have to check in your supply the details of how your supply was achieved. They want to know the simple thing. Are you certified or not? It's pretty simple for them. But if they want that, then the supplier actually wants to produce it. And if there isn't any demand, the supplier doesn't want to produce it. And the complexity is kind of a relative term. What I've seen on the question of is certification the only tool, of course it's not. Regulation, laws and rules are perhaps more comfortable, more certain for many of us in civil society. We want to see good forest management laws and regulations. On the other hand, if you're going to go through the legislative process, you know you're going to get pretty much the lowest common denominator. So there's a very important relationship between a legal minimum, if you can get it, in every society in which that's possible. But many people want more than just barely legal. They want something that's produced in as good a way as is economically viable and socially appropriate. And in many places there aren't good rules, so there's an important place for voluntary certification. And I would say that we really need to be worrying about what's going on outside the forests. We spend a lot of our time looking at the details and the science and all the uncertainties about what is really sustainable management, and we realize we don't even have a handle on that term yet after 20 years, and so we talk about well-managed forests, and you know, that's all real. But let's keep our eye on the fact that most of the pressure on forests comes from outside the forest. And we're really looking at expansion of agriculture and production of all kinds of things for food, feed, fiber, and now fuel and power. This ratcheting up of the production of biomass is more likely to be done in an agriculture context, maybe someday very large scale algae production. It matters very greatly where those new fields are going to be put. Is there going to be restoration of degraded land as the main place where the new biomass is going to come from? Or is it going to be simply moving aside current production of food, feed, and fiber? Where, if that's the case, then where's that going to go? And the more likely place is into important wetlands, important savannas, and then our forests. So that's why I'm kind of pleading for taking a strategic long view over the next months and years at the larger picture in which FSC operates, and maybe we can link up with the other sustainability, the really good ones, other sustainability certification systems.
Thank you. Marco and then Brad.
Still a word on simplicity, which I'm not sure is the right word, but I'm a forester by origin. I studied in Wageningen. I challenge you to say that. But most of you will know Wageningen University in forestry. And when I started, first of all, the professor said this is a long-term thing, and we still had 6 years in college back then, so we agreed. But he also said for every 2 foresters, you have 3 opinions. And that might have been the Dutch ones, but I would say that is across the room here in general. I've met too many Swedes and Finns, meanwhile, I think it still stands. Why making this remark? I don't think the call for simplicity is one to make weaker rules, but I think there's a fair call for simplicity to keep things workable. And that's a challenge. It's my first GA. I've been in the economic chamber yesterday. I can secure all NGOs that your chamber is way better organized than this one. Or at least that's my private view, but sorry guys, I'm betraying you. But there is a thing with simplicity to look at, which is workability. And industry should be the first one to look at themselves, because we tend to be the ones to ask for exemptions and make things more difficult. If you need to protect us a bit. I think where there's a point of attention, and it's not to the point where people walk away, I don't think we should even go there, but keep it as workable as possible. Because you hear the irritations in the companies, not only about the way it is, but the amount of changes and the way to adapt. And every discussion here today actually has sort of an effect of throwing a rock in a pond. It goes like a wave through industry everywhere. Be aware of that. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. And again, not simple, but workable maybe is a better word.
Brad.
2 points on that. Some of the first FSC forest managers were Indigenous forest managers in Canada and the US, who had, come hell or high water, maintained forests in the midst of the colonial expansion period on the North American continent. In particular, I'm thinking of the Menominee in upstate Wisconsin. If you look at their tribal lands now, you'll see a landscape of degraded farm and dairy lands all around their reserve, and literally bankrupt farms as far as the eye can see. And then in the middle of this is this wonderland. It's this beautifully managed indigenous forest. And FSC at that time went to the Menominee and said, how did you do this? And they said, well, it's common sense to an Indian. This is what you do. And they built a standard out of this in the US. And the same story could be said with the Northern Cree and Dene in Saskatchewan, Mystic Management and North Sask Forest Products. The same thing. There's a mix of Indigenous knowledge and of forest management and science and business acumen there that Indigenous people have brought into the FSC system, and it has been emulated across standards, and it has been emulated across the world, I would argue. One of the things, though, that we see with this, that with the emerging standards, and I am on the International Generic Indicators Group, I am a working group member in the Social North, is I do see, objectively speaking, an increase in the complexity of the forest management rigor, which is good. We are still deforesting in the world. So it's a matter of getting that right product mix, getting that product margin to support that value-added work and the additional work in the system. And this is where I think I want to challenge some of my colleagues in the chambers, where when we hear consistent pressure on the system and a pass to the other certification systems that in many opinions, are rubber stamped, and all the pressure is just on FSC, I think that's a false anchoring. Because I think the most excellent work in sustainability and working with complex issues is found in the FSC system. That being said, there are Indigenous forest managers that have come to me and have said, Brad, you know, we maintain this forest in the midst of all this clear cutting and all of this agricultural degradation that was put in place around us. And are people going to come to us and tell us that now we have to hire an HCV expert to tell us about biodiversity? And it's at that point where I put it before the chamber, and there are some motions in the assembly process that Indigenous people are challenging there. I think we have to be forward-looking. I think we have to also embrace technology in this sustainability question that we have with 9 billion people on the planet. And Indigenous people there are not Luddites as well. And I'll use, again, another example, another story to tell you that we're here to be visionaries with everybody, and we're here to participate on every level. The story of the Munsee Delaware Nation in southern Ontario. Totally surrounded by physical colonization. Their lands taken, stolen, expropriated. And they were patient. They've maintained themselves through just through sheer will of love of their land, love of their culture and their identity. And they have recently announced the application of fast-grow GMO hybrid technology that they are deploying on buying up all the degraded agricultural lands that was not sustainably managed by the colonial entities around us. They are buying that up on the market because it's bankrupt, the taxes aren't being paid, and they are deploying GMO Indigenous fast-grow technology to start containing the carbon threat in our atmosphere. And they will be growing fiber, they'll be containing that carbon, and they'll be selling it in the biomass and bioenergy market. Who knows, maybe they'll make some paper out of it too along the way with these supply chains and the technologies that you can do with fiber conversion. So I think it's that creativity and that energy that we don't want to chase away from the FSC system. I think there has to be an appreciation and a recognition, and I think there has to be some responsible calculations around the story and the messaging that your FSC firms and your operators and your supply chain need out there. Yes, there are problems. There are problems in many parts of the forested world. Devastation to the forests all over the world. But the positive players are in this room, and many of them are on the stage today. So that's what I have to say on that.
Thanks for that. I'd like to take a question or two, if that would be a good idea. Do we have some microphones out there? Can I see a thing? Yes, I can. Who has a question for this panel? Gentleman down here.
Thank you very much. Today I'm strong. Yesterday I was a bit sleepy after 13 hours of flying. And I lost my luggage, but today I found it, and I have my traditional stick with me. So I can ask the panelists. First of all, I thank the organizers for inviting us to this meeting. And back, there is a forest, a very nice forest. If the panelists can turn back and see what is behind, there's a very beautiful forest. This process reminds us of our responsibility as humans. When our Creator created us, he said, or she said, take care of the creation. And the way we are able to live in harmony with nature. But now, the trees, the wild animals, and even domestic animals started running away from us because of our habit of not taking care of them. And even in this General Assembly, we are supposed to bring children with us to witness our focus on sustainability because we forgot what we were supposed to do. But I'm glad that Forest Stewardship Council reminds us of our responsibility as humans. And I have two questions. I'm not sure if they are questions or comments. But one, when we talk of certification, do we certify forest in order to use the forest resources, or we certify our behavior to continue exploiting the little forest left? But another, is it us as humans who are supposed to certify forest, or forests are the ones supposed to certify us as humans? But another thing, when we talk of forest, do we mean forest or we mean planet? Because as humans, what is as humans, when we see forest, do we see trees? Do we see timber or forest resources? What about our traditional knowledge? What about our culture? Is our culture in harmony with forest? Is our culture in harmony with nature? All these questions need to be answered, especially on focus on the strategic plan that we discussed yesterday, but I was a bit sleepy, so I didn't follow the way I was supposed to follow. But we are so happy to be part of this process, and we represent indigenous peoples.
Thank you.
But as my people, I'm from the Maasai people, who are nomadic people. And we rely heavily on natural resources. But for example, if you look at the standards of FSC, all these standards are focusing on forest. What about grasslands? What about the landscapes? If we don't have community standards, for example, how are we going to ensure sustainability and the future of our children? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I pick up a couple of the points made there? One of them really fascinated me. It was something that you said earlier on, Diogo, which was you're doing this because it's the right thing to do. And I'm always very interested in that. from inside really large corporations like the ones that you run, is it a battle to convince your colleagues that this is the right thing to do, or is it natural? And picking up the point made there, does this come from a straightforward commercial question, which is, you know, this is a differentiation, it's great, it happens to be a good differentiation, let's go. Peter?
Well, I can only speak for Ikea, but if you run a company that has a vision of creating a better everyday life for the many people, that is what my board, my owner foundation is asking me whether I deliver to or not. It's not about selling more bookcases next week or constantly having revenues that are increases. It is about creating a better everyday life for the many people. And that goes for the customers that has the opportunity to buy our products and get a better home. But of course, it also means that we have to take a great deal of responsibility throughout our value chain. So I guess in some forums, businesses could be considered as cynical and all about making more money. That's not the thing for Ikea. We are driven by a vision. And if you have a vision of creating a better everyday life for the many people, I think it becomes obvious in the era that we're in today that you should do business in a sustainable way. And that's where FSC certification and FSC plays a very important role.
Thank you for that.
No, I think, you know, as I fully agree with those comments. I think, you know, it's in the same way we look at it. We have a motto that says, you know, protects what's good. Obviously, the motto was primarily focused on food, but I think, you know, it applies very much to this subject as well. And for us, it's important to live up to what we stand for, and this is one way of doing it, no doubt.
Diogo.
Yeah, 2 points on that. I think we have to recognize that it's a lot easier today to convince everyone that, you know, you need to respect the social part and the environmental part besides economics. It's a lot easier today than it was 10 years ago. And I hope in 10 years' time it will be even easier than it is today. Okay? Point one. So to illustrate then, you, besides the words, of course, you need to act. And trying to share the example of what we're doing in Mozambique. So we were given the right to use over 300,000 hectares, and we agreed to only forest 2/3 of it, just to be sure that with the other 1/3 of the surface, we would be able to help 23,000 families that do live there. And as you were saying, the search for inclusive growth will, in a way, force us going from forest to agriculture, because we have committed to help the agricultural part in the 1/3 part of the surface we were given. So, you know, we suggested to do that. So I would say that 10 years ago it would have been tougher, and I'm sure in 10 years' time it will be easier.
Thanks, Marco.
Yeah, just a point, because the distinguished gentleman also almost raised a personal question, or at least I felt it as personal, and you do the same. But what you recognize throughout industry, and definitely in the forest parts of our industry, is that 100.1% of the people we work with loves the forest. I think that's also about the values you talked about. We might discuss it from a different national perspective or from a different perspective. If the companies are able to put the priorities where they need to be, then on a personal level, I think you'll see the most passionate people about forest also in this industry, in the companies who are working there on a daily basis. We have huge debates in CEPI on what exactly is good or right when you talk to the details and the procedures and if it applies here or it doesn't apply there. But the forest committee, as we used to call the raw materials group, is a very passionate group of people. And on the value side, I think that's there. Making it a bit more personal, I'm in debate with my 11-year-old daughter. She used to be the princess and I used to be the king, but she's moved to a new stage in life. And her teachers, yeah, I think you recognize, she has the hair and the eyes, and I am not able to do that. But the teachers try to tell her that using forest is not a good thing. And this is where we disagree. but where the discussion starts. And that's one part where I'm a bit surprised, to be honest. On day one in school, the use of the wood products is told to be a bad thing. I don't agree. From the core of my heart, if we're, as we used to call it, into multifunctional forestry, or if we're able to define sustainable forestry, that's what will bring us forward. And I need to thank Ikea for a movie on YouTube, which is promoting the paper book instead of the iPad. Compare any day of the world an iPad to that, and we win, I'm pretty sure.
Thanks for that. Brad.
So the question is something that we've debated and presented on the Permanent Indigenous Peoples Committee a few times, but I'd like to open up the discussion, some of the discussion content to the Assembly and the panel. We've talked about this from an Indigenous perspective, and I think first off, the National Aboriginal Forestry Association, and I think most Indigenous leaders would agree that there just needs to be some places in the world where there are wild Indians. There are wild Indians just interested in being Indians. But what we have found, though, what we have found through the arc of history and the arc of awareness of other ways of living in our communities on Turtle Island, is that unless an Indigenous people has a way of operating and occupying the economic space in their traditional territory, with the growth of billions of people additional on our traditional territories in aggregate every year, it means that your strategies around forest management and around the occupation of that economic space has to change with the times. And we found this in Canada. We still do have, I'm happy to say, areas where there are just wild Indians. In fact, some of the elders that have put time and energy to me, the first time that they saw a non-Indigenous person was in the late 70s. They were hidden back in the mountain valleys, deep in the forests, hidden. And we still have that in limited areas in Canada, and we need to support that. But for the vast majority of Indigenous communities, even though we're nomadic, we have a core territory, do we not, Adam? And in that core territory, yes, there's grassland, there's rivers, there's water, but there's forest. And so this is one strategy for Indigenous people, but I think people all over the world to consider is this economic space should be used sustainably. And there will be a variety of strategies, a variety of market pressures and market opportunities to develop that. So finding that mix is going to be unique. It's going to be different in each context. But I'm going to return it again that I think Indigenous people all over the world will have a unique value proposition to add to whatever your particular strategy is there.
Thanks. Thank you very much for that, and thank you for your question. Another question? Gentleman here. Hi.
Yo soy Luis Astorga de la Cámara Social del Sur y realmente me alegra mucho tener la posibilidad en esta asamblea del FSC de poder hacer preguntas a personas tan importantes y de ocupando cargos tan altos dentro de la economía forestal. Creo que yo quisiera hacer dos preguntas. La primera pregunta se relaciona con, nosotros tomamos como un hecho que la demanda crece y hasta qué punto crece. O sea, hasta qué punto todo va siendo un aumento en el consumo, un aumento en la demanda. No hay un límite en el crecimiento, precisamente, y creo que ese es un punto que todavía faltaría de considerar en esta reunión. Y el segundo punto se refiere a que si ustedes piensan que los bosques están en el sur, las plantaciones están principalmente en el sur, y me dio mucho argumento el señor de Portugal, que precisamente dice, mire, nosotros vamos a hacer una plantación en Mozambique. ¿Y qué está pasando? En el sur, los bosques se están destruyendo. Hay una destrucción de los bosques. Y también se han hecho plantaciones que están causando impactos en el sur, impactos sociales, impactos ambientales. Entonces, la certificación tiene que tener mucho más rigurosidad en el sur. Creo que en el norte la certificación FSC es mucho más simple, está mucho más cerca de las legislaciones de cada país. Pero en el sur está muy lejos y por lo tanto la rigurosidad de la certificación tiene que ser mucho mayor en el sur. Y ahí hay un punto también que quisiera recoger del Señor de los Pueblos Indígenas, y que es el siguiente: los territorios donde se pueden hacer plantaciones en el sur son territorios que muchas veces están ocupados y que tienen conflictos con las comunidades indígenas. Y creo que, como dijo la presidenta de AFPN, nosotros no podemos pensar en que se deba certificar áreas o territorios donde precisamente hay conflictos reales y potenciales hasta que esos conflictos no se resuelvan. Y creo que ese es un punto muy importante, no solamente en el norte, sino que en el sur, principalmente porque es donde están los conflictos con los pueblos indígenas.
Thank you for that. Limits to growth, I think that's a big topic. More rigorous, the question here about the FSC being present where greater governance systems are absent, and the pressure on FSC to apply more rigor, or to be more rigorous, or to take a better, I'm not quite sure, take a stronger stance there. Diogo, you have plantations in the north and the south. Do you feel different responsibilities when you're working in an area without such strong legal frameworks, for instance? Or is it more difficult?
It's, at least the starting points are very different. So if we can take some extremes. In Portugal, unfortunately, most of the forest ownership is very small. And when I mean very small, it means that roughly 85% of the owners have less than 3 hectares. So when I mean small, small. So you can imagine that to deal with that, it's quite different than the situation we will be dealing with in Mozambique, where on average each area will be, of course, over, say, 10,000 hectares. So very different situations, and of course, until today, FSC will be very, very relevant. Our intention is to do in Mozambique just the same as in Portugal, 100% certified, of course. But the way of doing it will be very different because of the sheer size. Then, of course, the impact and the influence it will have in a country like Mozambique, namely not only the economic, but the environmental and mostly the social impact will be, of course, very different, because the clear idea here is to, as I said, not only make sure to increase the level of income of the population that is in the area, and we have made a huge mapping with satellites and all this unbelievable technology today to know exactly who is there, where they are, to respect, of course, both the environmental part, because in Mozambique, as in other places, you also have water, lakes, this specific biodiversity that you have then to respect. So it's very different because you start from zero. So when you start from zero, the only reason for not doing it well is if you don't want to. If you do want to do it well, and we do want to do it well, we will do it well, and we will respect, of course, everything. So the starting point here is crucial. So,
thank you. Barbara.
Well, I think it's important to agree with the questioner. Thank you very much for pointing out two totally different sets of questions. One is about how important voluntary certification is in places where perhaps the laws in the area, country, are not so protective of people's rights and environmental values. And then you raised the very specific question of land conflicts. And I will say that based on what the FSC had put together years ago, there's a big influence of FSC on the RSB. So this is actually something, kind of a good advertisement for FSC, that it showed it was possible, in fact, to have standards that would apply specifically aimed in places where there was not a good basic set of laws to protect people and the environment. So the RSB took on both of those things and added water conflicts, because it's just as important in many places as land conflicts are existing conflicts over water, and with native peoples very specifically. And so we have a few applicants in Africa who are working on the same basis that you're talking about, because RSB will only allow certification if the land use conflicts are resolved first, if the water is, the traditional uses of water are mapped and people know that they will be able to have the new uses are not taking sort of more than their fair share of the water availability, surface and underground. It's very difficult. But that was the point. I mean, you're entirely right. The standard is there to make sure that no certified operation is making things worse for the people who already live there, and we actually ask that they try to make things better. So one of our plantation applicants of RSB is helping to restore some land to make a plantation as a center core bit of infrastructure that's going to enable the local communities around to both rent some of their land to this plantation operation, but also have some new techniques to grow product for that operation, so they'll have income two ways, and they will have an automatic market and automatic infrastructure in which to sell their product, which before this they had no way to get their product to a preferred market. So yes, I think certification is an enabler for improvements both in rural development and in management of the water resource and the land resource. But what to do about limits to growth, I think is the philosophic question for the age, for the entire century that we are embarking on. My own personal belief is that as these limits become clearer and certification is required more and more care will be taken, and we will end up essentially gardening the entire earth, because we can't just let anybody do whatever they want with the resources that belong to the whole planet. And that will become clearer as it is more dear. Water management, soil management, biodiversity management is going to have to become everybody's business. But that's just me. I have no idea where it's going.
Pilar.
Me parece interesante lo que acaba de comentar Bárbara, pensando sobre todo en lo que ocurre en Chile. En Chile los impactos y las externalidades negativas están justamente relacionadas de forma contraria a lo que has mencionado tú. Y el tema del agua, por ejemplo, en nuestro caso es un problema con las plantaciones de rápido crecimiento de grandes superficies y por las prácticas de talas rasas, también en grandes superficies, con pérdida de suelo. Entonces, para nosotros es algo, o sea, escuchando un poco lo que tú mencionas, es totalmente contradictorio a lo que ocurre en nuestro territorio y esto está afectando gravemente a las comunidades porque ya se está hablando de una crisis hídrica. Agua para consumo humano ya en muchas poblaciones.
Is with FSC operations specifically causing these problems? Is that the case?
Empresas certificadas, FSC, hoy día, y plantaciones que están certificadas hoy día, están relacionadas con este tipo de problemas. Por lo tanto, por eso es muy contradictorio. Y hay otros problemas ya también que tienen que ver, por ejemplo, con la pérdida de biodiversidad y con plantas medicinales en comunidades indígenas, que eso tiene un uso cultural, un uso tradicional, pero también un uso espiritual, que tiene que ver con los ñen y los espíritus. Cuando se secan los ríos o se secan las nacientes de agua, eso está relacionado, muy relacionado al tema espiritual de las comunidades. Y eso es algo que no se aborda de una manera seria, por decirlo de una forma, desde las certificadoras. Y por eso que yo mencionaba en un principio en este foro, esa es nuestra preocupación hoy día. A mí me alegra que esto se esté conversando a este nivel, pero el tema más práctico, cuando uno va a los territorios y lo que ocurre ahí, claro, lo que se comenta aquí es súper contrastante con lo que ocurre. Entonces, bueno, aparte del tema del agua y lo del suelo, también están los productos químicos que se utilizan. Y eso que ha contaminado aguas, y hay casos que a nosotros nos llegan que a veces son muy difíciles de documentar o son muy difíciles de verificar, porque tiene que ir una persona de la comunidad que se ha enfermado a un centro médico y decir y luego eso llevarlo a la certificadora. Entonces todos estos procesos, si bien lo que se ha conversado aquí se ha avanzado bastante, y para nuestro país, para Chile, ha sido muy importante el tema de FSC. Nosotros participamos como organización desde sus inicios, por eso que apelamos al espíritu del FSC y a los principios y criterios. Pero es una preocupación hoy día cómo se llevan esto en la práctica y en los territorios, y especialmente con las comunidades que hoy día están sufriendo estos impactos y estas externalidades, que muchas veces han tenido que salir de sus territorios y ir a las ciudades y mantener este círculo de pobreza en el fondo, porque ir a las ciudades para un campesino no es lo mismo que trabajar la tierra.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you very much. We're well overrun, and I don't see anybody demand. Right. Let's just take this opportunity, I think, I'll take one more question, just because that's what we do around here, isn't it? Two more questions, apparently. That's also what we do around here.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Stefan Dirks. I'm working with Chibo, which is a Germany-based retailer. And so I can say I'm a member on the demand side of the value chain. So the basic thesis of this discussion is that there will be a continuously rising demand. And I totally agree with this thesis. But to my opinion, it will be essential to continuously raise the demand for sustainable solutions and sustainable products. And so my question goes mainly to the CEOs of the enterprises on the demand side of the chain. What will be the essential factors for this continuously raising the demand for sustainable products by consumers, and also, of course, by retailers and other enterprises at the demand side? Thank you.
Jim.
I'll take the first shot at that. I think when you look at global demand for products from the forest products industry, which would be from building materials to pulp and paper, I think history actually charts a pretty good course for how that's going to grow. It grows at 2%, sometimes 3% a year on average globally. And it'll vary from region to region and from product to product, of course. Newsprint's declining, where other sorts of packaging materials and solid wood materials are increasing in demand. But overall, the demand for wood products, history shows a pretty even trend throughout the business cycles. I think the risk is, and it's been addressed by some of the other folks on the stage with me, is the law of unintended consequences for some government policies around climate change. It's very concerning to me, and it should be to those of us that really espouse the three-legged stool of sustainability that we represent here at FSC. How can it be good environmental, social, and economic policy to take a merchantable log that could be run through a sawmill and then byproducts into a pulp and paper mill, and then ultimately the waste then either goes to bioproducts or to bioenergy, versus taking a merchantable log and running it through a grinder and then generating energy and driving that behavior through artificial economic payments for the value of that energy. And that's what's worrying me. I'm worried that the governments are trying to do the right things and incent behavior to deal with the climate change, which is a very important issue. But sometimes government policy does not necessarily match good policy when it comes to getting the best for the economy, which is maximum value added, the best for social, which is the most jobs possible, with the best with environment, which is well-managed forest, and then getting the energy out of the residuals. So we've seen tremendous change in behavior, particularly in operations in Europe. We have an operation in France where we would depend heavily on the managed forest to supply our operation there. And it's very troubling because I'm concerned that we're not dealing evenly with the three pillars of sustainability. And we're focused on climate change with certain policies that are driving behaviors that are different, I think, to what's good for society and the economy. That's my best shot at it.
Thank you. That sounds like our best shot.
No, maybe I can comment a little bit. As I can only agree with your comments. I think as demand and consumption is going to continue. But I think as the way we look at it as a company, I think what you have to do on the one side is we believe, as I said before, renewable resources, and we will continue increasing, or making all efforts to actually increase, the supply that comes from renewable resources, and that is, including board, is including materials today not being renewable or not coming from renewable resources, which are part of our packaging. We've done that with bio-based polymers for our caps, for our laminate as well. And we'll continue through innovation to find alternatives to those that are not renewable, like aluminum, for example. So that is part of it. But at the same time, I think what is important is to secure transparency, awareness, and that is part of our responsibility as well. Because the more aware people, consumers are, is the more they're going to help us actually to have all playing by the same rules. And I think that is going to be very important going forward. The more competition for renewable resources, the more important is that everyone plays by the same rules.
Yes, if I can add one thought, which is we shouldn't talk only about the growth, which is clear, but which is driven by demographics, but as much also in the solutions I think FSC can offer to where will the growth be. Because the fact is the EU population will be stable around 520 million people. We're looking at not such a growing economy now, but for quite some time to go. And yesterday one slide was quite relevant, which is showing that the intra-south trade is where the huge increase will be. And maybe we should diversify. In Europe and the US, we're really bothered by these energy subsidies, which is increasing the demand in Europe, but it's not the newsprint demand, as my colleague said here as well. So let's be a bit more specific, whereas the growing middle class is the real growth, which will happen in the south and not so much on the European side. So it's just a side remark, but I think the one-size-fits-all solution won't work here. Growth will have definitely very different phases around the planet.
Kia ora tātou. I'm George Asher from New Zealand. I'm an Indigenous CEO of an Indigenous planted production forestry company which is located on Indigenous lands. The forest that we operate is relatively small. The total area is 50,000 hectares. The planted area is 33,000 hectares. The 27,000 hectares remaining has been set aside for protection purposes, environmental, riparian, and to protect our sacred and heritage places. And that decision was made by our old people 40 years ago. They made that decision before the investor was allowed to turn the first sod of earth to plant the first tree. So we are very proud of the position that we have today. Our owners are very proud, even though a lot of assessors have come along and said you can plant a lot more area of land than what you currently have. But we see FSC as something that really encourages us, reminds us, and upholds our rights to apply our Indigenous values. And the question I have, because as Brad said before, we want to occupy a number of spaces that are compliant with our values, and one of those values is to ensure our right of development and to enter that commercial space through the utilisation of our lands. And one of the questions, or the question I have to the panel, is related to our concern about those who, I guess, squeeze through the system. And there have been accusations of FSC maybe allowing some of that squeeze for companies to be certified who don't quite make those hurdles. And what I want to hear from you is your views on whether that intelligence, I guess, is something that you guys read in your systems, and if you have any contribution to an answer on that in terms of future demand and supply. The question is, have the companies represented by our panel, do you have views on how we may exercise, to put it a better way, the strengths of FSC going forward in the area of fibre supply, mainly in the area of supply, to ensure that the playing field is reasonably level? Thank you.
Thanks, George. Peter.
Maybe just a comment. It was a rather complex question, but for me, it's very important that the FSC is, as any system, it's not free from flaws, but the core of it has to be good enough to stand up for what we would like it to stand up for, you know. Basically that it takes us into a more sustainable direction towards the future. That the wood supply that we are utilizing within Ikea meets the requirements that we can be proud of, as well as the customer demands from us. I think that would be my contribution to the question.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Any other comments? Brian?
There was a number of us in the room here earlier today, and there was a situation that was being raised in terms of certain probabilities of outcomes with controlled wood reform. And I tried to just go to the back of the room and not say anything, but I was spotted out and asked to comment on this. This is a part of, I think, part of the question around the rigor for some FSC operations and getting in a certain level of performance fiber into the system. And is it fair? And one of my colleagues here to my right from Canada, you don't need to figure it out. I can say, because I have actual Indigenous members of my organization who deal with the company, they come to agreement. They come to full agreement. And this was the crux of what was being asked in the controlled wood session was basically there was a number of entities representing a number of interests saying, we just can't come to FPIC agreement, or we just can't do this in this part of the standard, or this is impossible, we just can't do it. And while some of that might be legitimate for some kind of unique circumstantial reason, I would challenge the Economic Chamber to think about firms that are the base of your supply chain, that are actually in full compliance operationally with the FSC standard in your part of the world, who are coming to agreement, who are doing good things with set-asides, who are doing all the right things, and competing in a marketplace then with companies who are not doing all of those things. And in terms of the crass logic of profit margins and of value added then, is that fair for the good operators in the FSC system to be competing in an artificially incentivized situation there? And I think I just raise it for the Assembly and the panel, and I think there's some calm, mature, and knowing minds there that I think the system has to crack down on some of that. I think the experts in the FSC staff and in the CB world and in the other parts of the world, you have to get the temperature right, because it might not be warm enough right now, but it can't be too hot. So I think that's a part of it, and trusting the system to move along and to handle that, and that takes a leap of faith. And there's a lot of leaps of faith in this FSC thing. So I think that's my contribution to the answer. But again, I'll come back again, and I'm completely biased here. Think about an Indigenous forest manager who is FSC certified, who is doing all the right things and could be a part of your supply chain base. And that is where there's some levels of CSR protection and goodwill calculations that I think would be interesting for the group to consider. And for those of you in the room that might have an interest set to try and maneuver things this way or that way in terms of this supposed pressure, I can understand it, but I think the concerns that good producers and good operators like Lake Taupo Forest Trust, like Chairman and CEO George Asher bring up, I think we need to consider those quite carefully and deal with them responsibly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There are questions out there. I'm sorry to disappoint you. We're well over time. I think we should call it a day. Thank you. Kim.
So I would like to thank the panel. I would like to thank the Indigenous comments and the leaps of faith that we hear from Indigenous groups. I'd like to thank the leaps of faith that we are hearing from our Economic Chamber partners that you have done 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, today and tomorrow. We need that. I'd like to hear the support from, I'd like to thank for the support from environmental perspectives, and I would like to thank also for the concerns and the criticism that we hear from some of our partners in this room and out there in the world. That is very important that we have that, because we are not claiming that we have everything right. We are not claiming that every certified area is absolutely perfect. It's not. There are problems out there. There are problems in Chile, and we want to solve them. We're trying, and we will. It'll take time, but we'll get there. And I believe the leaps of faith that we see among groups like this one is the basis upon which we'll be able to do that. So thank you very much for your perspectives. Thank you very much for coming. And I would like everybody to give our panel a hand, because I think they've done a very good job. Thank you very much.